So I want to start by talking about a time not that long ago when the presidential election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump was nearing its end, and there was just so much negativity on the news and fear and anger, and I realized that I was starting to feel really distrustful of people, everyone. And one day, I was driving all the way home from work. I was living in Maryland. We lived near Washington, D.C. It was a long commute. I needed to go pick up my son from daycare, and I really needed to use the restroom. So I pulled off at a little gas station, tiny little gas station, and there was only one other person in there, the man who worked there, and there was a little bathroom behind like a stand of chips, and I had to go behind the chips to get in the bathroom, and it was this little bitty bathroom, and I realized that the door didn't lock, and I got really scared that I was alone, a young, small woman in this bathroom that didn't lock. So I hurried and did what I needed to do, and as I was, getting back my clothes on and everything, I hit my head on the back of the sink so hard that I kind of passed out for a second. Just 1 second, and I came back to and realized that it was the fear that had caused me to rush in that way, and what that fear was about, that larger sense of distrust in the world. And I realized that's not how I want to be. That's not who I want to be. That's not how I want to live my life. That my goal about what I believe about people and the world, that barn, that goal out there, that I had lost my line, my rope. And so I had to kind of come back. I had to find that line, which is my values, my principles, especially the Unitarian Universalist principle number 1, that everyone had inherent worth and dignity, that I had sort of lost that. So I had to find it so that I could come back to my vision for the world and my faith. And we're going to talk more about that today. What does it mean to have that vision and that line? Today we're celebrating Martin Luther King. There were lots of storms in his day as well. Many of them are still raging today. Inequality, inequity, racism, oppression, classism, poverty, war. Martin Luther King's goal out there was the beloved community, which Scott talked a little bit about. We're going to talk more about that later. King had a hold of his line in the storm, and he would have called that line many things, but one of them he would have called God. I'm going to quote from his sermon, Paul's Letter to American Christians, which can be found in a compilation of his sermons, Strength to Love. King wrote, quote, "If any earthly institution or custom conflicts with God's will, it is your Christian duty to oppose it. You must never allow the transitory demands of man-made institutions to take precedence over the eternal demands of the Almighty God." Tomorrow, our society celebrates the legacy of King and his contributions to the civil rights movement, but we ignore his theology. How many of you have heard that quote about following the eternal demands of the Almighty God on Martin Luther King Day? Exactly. Right? We don't talk about his theology. We just use these little bitty quotes, and I get really annoyed, as you probably do as well, when people pluck quotes out of the Bible to defend things, but they ignore the context of the Bible, right? That's super annoying. Similarly, I get annoyed when people pull things out of King's words entirely out of context, that he was a person of a particular kind of faith. That beautiful quote that Scott shared earlier, which I know many of us have heard, hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. It continues. So when Jesus says, love your enemies, he's setting forth a profound and ultimately inescapable admonition. Only love can drive out hate. But he's saying Jesus is the one who told us that. And he said, We should be happy that Jesus did not say, like your enemies, because it's impossible to like some people. Like is a sentimental and affectionate word, but Jesus recognized that love is greater than like. Those are King's words. That's the context of that hate cannot drive out hate quote. He was a Black Baptist preacher. Of course he was going to talk about Jesus. It'd be weird if he didn't. The Black church of that time was influenced heavily by and creating their own version of liberation theology. So I'm going to do my semi-annual theology history lesson here. First of all, many of us grew up in another faith tradition, right? And we might have been told in that tradition that ours was the only theology, the only way, the only truth. Any of us learn that? Yeah. But there are many types of theology, friends. There's fundamentalist theology. There's liberal theology. That's our branch. There's queer theology. There's feminist theology. There's womanist theology, which emerges out of the Black tradition. There's eco-theology. There's eco-feminist theology. I could go on. But this one, liberation theology, emerged in the 1960s, especially in Latin American Catholicism, after Vatican II, and South America was just completely destroyed by a lot of civil war and extreme poverty at the time. And these theologians, led by people like Gustavo Gutierrez and John Sobrino, popularized the phrase, God's preferential treatment for the poor. This was the idea that in that faith tradition, in liberation theology, God preferred the oppressed. God was on the side of the poor. It was a political praxis, which is a word that means a practice of study and reading, reflection and action. That goes back into the reading and the study and the reflection and the action. They feed each other. That's what praxis means. And they this praxis insisted that the God of the Christian faith, as revealed in the Christian Bible and through the person of Jesus, was on the side of the poor, and to call oneself a Christian meant that we could not simply be for the poor, but to quote Gutierrez, to bring them to the fullness of human flourishing. So this was liberation theology at the time, and this is what King was preaching. This had come from South America, and it was influencing the Dalit of India, the caste system, and it was also influencing the Black church in the United States. In those sermons that we love to quote, in those letters that we love to read, his vision for our society was the beloved community. And we like to quote those letters and those sermons, but we do so in a vacuum. But it's important to remember that he had a source of inspiration. King, like Jesus, was a radical. Carsey Blanton just reminded us of that so beautifully. King's vision for the beloved community was that the world would be filled with justice, free from oppression. All people would flourish, which was described in the Lord's Prayer, or the Our Father, as thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The King's Center, which exists to sort of propagate King's teachings today, the King's Center says, quote, for Dr. King, the beloved community was not some lofty utopian goal to be confused with the rapturous image of the peaceable kingdom where lions and lambs coexist in idyllic harmony. Rather, they say, the beloved community was for him a realistic, achievable goal that could be attained by a critical mass of people committed to and trained in the philosophy and methods of nonviolence. So if beloved community was the goal, the barn, then love was the tether, or the line that King was holding on to, the kind of love that is described in the Christian scriptures. The Greek word is agape love, The Greeks have lots of words for love, which is really cool. Agape love is not romantic love. It's overflowing love. This is King's words. Overflowing love, purely spontaneous, unmotivated, groundless, and creative. King says, agape love is the love of God operating in the human heart. It is love seeking to preserve and create community. That was what King was holding on to, that kind of love. In July 13th, 1966, an article in the Christian Century magazine, Dr. King affirmed the ultimate goal of the beloved community as his quest. He said, quote, "I do not think of political power as the end. I do not think of economic power as the end. They are ingredients in the objective that we seek. And I think that the end of that objective is a truly brotherly society, the creation of the beloved community." So that's the goal, beloved community. Now, you use like to use the phrase beloved community. Have you ever heard me use the phrase beloved community? Okay, I hope so. The first service, they all nodded. You all are looking at me blankly. I use the phrase a lot. In fact, this phrase, beloved community, appears in the draft version of our fellowship's new mission statement, which we'll be hearing more about from our governing board soon. They've been drafting a new mission based on your input, lots and lots of group input and individual input, and they will seek feedback on this new draft mission statement soon, within the next month, and then it will be voted on at the annual meeting in early June. But this statement, the beloved community, appears in our new mission statement. It also appears in the draft version of the new UUA principles, which are potentially going to change our 7 principles. And the phrase beloved community appears in that draft as well. If you want more information about the new principles, read the scroll. That will be coming out soon. But when we use the phrase beloved community, we don't mean exactly the same thing as what King meant. We have a different context than him. We can't possibly mean the exact same thing. But that's okay. It's okay to have a little bit different definition. Like the spirit of life. We just sang that song in Spanish, Fuente de Amor. We're going to sing it in English again in a little while, Spirit of Life. It is the most UU song ever. In fact, the UU World magazine, every March, comes out with a competition, kind of like March Madness, the most UU thing ever, and they pit things against each other and people vote. It's really fun. You should participate. And it always comes down to the Flaming Chalice and Spirit of Life. Spirit of Life is so UU, and I would like to challenge anyone in here want to take a whack at defining what we mean when we say spirit of life? No? Steve? Just kidding. Steve's in seminary, we get to do that to him now. The thing is, if I did call on a bunch of you to define spirit of life, we would have different definitions. We just would, and that's okay. Which makes me want to talk for a minute about words. So you all might know I have a son. I have 2 sons. One is 7 and one is almost 4. And when Ellis, our little one, was, maybe 2 years old, maybe not quite 2, he was talking but barely, and we could hardly understand what he said. You know that phrase, that phase. And I was putting him to bed, and every night, he still does this, he would ask me to sing him a song, but it would be like a totally random request, like sing a song about butterflies, and I would have to just make up a song about butterflies. And he was really into trucks, and this night he said, sing a song alligator. I was like, alligators? No. Elevators? No. You know how 2-year-olds get mad at you when you don't understand what they're saying. And I'm like, honey, I don't know. And rather than just repeat this impossible to understand word, he turned and he looked at me and he did this with his hand. He went, it goes like dig. And I said, excavator. He's like, yes. Sing a song about excavators, obviously. You would not believe the number of songs I have to sing about trucks. Right now, many of you know I've been experiencing some kind of nerve pain, and it's starting to improve because I'm getting better medications. But one of the side effects of one of those medications is that I'm having word-finding difficulty. So sort of like Ellis in this story, I'll be in the middle of a sentence, and I have to start working my way around that word that I'm trying to say. It's like a game of charades, kind of. I'll be like, I was drinking my... And my friend will say, tea? And I'll say, no, the one with the beans. And they'll say, coffee? Yes. That. We can do this thing where we explain what we mean with nouns or with concepts that we all have a common understanding of. That's how words work. Coffee, we all basically understand what we mean when we say that word. Excavator, if you have any understanding of trucks, you know what that means. But the beloved community does not have an exact definition. We have a sense of it. Spirit of life does not have an exact definition. We might have a sense of it. But there is one word that has been, in many ways, trapped and made into a noun that is not a noun: God. All right, I want us to all take a couple deep breaths together. Because I know for some people in this room, that word can be a trigger, and for good reason. Some of us were harmed by people who wanted to use that word in a particular way. There was trauma inflicted by people who wanted to use that word in a particular way. So it's okay, take a deep breath. But not everyone in this room feels the same way. Some of the people in this room are theists. They believe in a God, some form of whatever that word means. And that's the thing. It's a word. It's a very weird word, a very powerful word, but it has no set definition. You can look it up in Merriam-Webster. I know one of you is going to email me the definition later. But the definition, that's a very shallow definition. This concept is way too big for a dictionary. And remember all those types of theologies that I named? There are so many ways to understand this word. And I will probably, in the next 5 minutes, say the word God more than I have in the last 12 months, and that's good. Because I've been told by so many of you that this word is a trigger. It can cause you, when you hear that word, to just shut your ears. And that's okay, I understand that. But I want us to be a place where we can heal, where we can reopen ourselves. I want this word to start to lose its meaning that whatever it once had. You know how you say a word so many times you forget what it means? That's what we're going to do together. Have any of you seen Eve Ensler's vagina monologues? It's really famous a while ago. One of the concepts of vagina monologues is that they say the word vagina so many times that by the end you're like, oh yeah, I'm not squeamish about that word anymore. So that's partly what we're going to do for the next few minutes. So stay with me, please. I'm begging you. I promise you I'm not going to start demanding some uniform belief system. I have not yet so far. But it's also my goal to allow those of you for whom God has a place in your own theology to know that you have a home here too in Unitarian Universalism. We can each have our own understanding of that word, but sometimes for those people for whom God has been used as a weapon, when you hear that word, you tell other people that we cannot use that word here. And that is not true. We can. And we can all open ourselves to these many, many, many definitions of this word. For people who spend their lives doing the work of theology, they learn and they open and they have broken open this concept in such rich ways for us. It might be surprising to some of you in this room that many of my friends who are mainstream Christian pastors, Methodist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, UCC, that those pastors do not believe in a God who is a father in the sky. They don't believe that. Because they've studied theology. There's too many types of theology. They have opened themselves to other possibilities of this word. They might believe closer to what we might call the spirit of life. And I taught a UU theology class last year. We covered a lot of ground together, but whenever we veered in the direction of God and we started talking about all the ways that that word could be understood, I remember some of you in this room were there, we would get excited. Our most passionate conversations were talking about how we can reinterpret God to mean something different from whatever the narrow definition was that we inherited. For the next few weeks, overlapping between our January focus of peace in the storm and our February focus of drawing the circle wide, we're also going to have a sermon series about the metaphors of God. I must say that word very loud. Metaphors. We're going to talk about all different definitions because we know that some definitions of God have been used in painful and narrow ways, but others have been expansive and helpful and loving, and that is the definition that King had. That's the definition of God that King was holding on to when he called us toward the beloved community. A God of love for everyone, and those most clearly on the margins of our society. The fact is, as Unitarian Universalists, we have a wide range of options when it comes to God, and whether or not we believe in God is the least interesting of those options. I'm going to say that again. We have a wide range of options when it comes to God, and whether or not we believe in God is the least interesting of those options. In 1961, when Unitarians and Universalists came together to form this new faith, this new thing, we declared ourselves to be non-creedal, no creed. We freed ourselves at the foundation of our faith from these bonds of creed. We allowed ourselves to explore our understandings of traditional religious concepts. Man, what a gift that our founders gave to us. And then for decades, instead of explore and expand, we expelled. Many UUs just threw out the idea of God as nonsense. And that in doing so, it solidified the idea as one thing. We reduced God to a single simple definition that we then tossed out. But we could have had a more interesting, powerful, and fun approach, which would have been to stretch and poke and prod and mold that understanding. If we had done that, and we might do that together for the next few weeks to understand the metaphor of God, we will still find that some of us do or do not believe in God, and that is fine. No one is required either way. But when we do this work of stretching and molding and poking and prodding, we're going to also find inroads and new understandings to each other, to the people sitting near you who do not have the same definition that you do, I promise. We're going to find inroads and understandings to our allies, our neighbors, our opponents. We might even find new understandings of ourselves. And we might find a more useful expression of this metaphor in our own lives. We can't do that if we throw it away. God can be the still, small voice. God can be fire. God can be the cosmos. God can be love. Whatever we call it, however we describe it, whether or not we believe in it, we still need something to tether us to our vision of the beloved community. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have called that faith. He said, quote, "Faith is taking the first step even though you can't see the whole staircase." He would have called it hope, We must accept finite disappointment, but we must never lose hope. He would have called it love. He said, agape is not a weak, passive love. It is love in action. He would have called it God. Quote, our capacity to deal creatively with shattered dreams is ultimately determined by our faith in God. Those were King's words. Regardless of what you call it, can you feel it? That thing connecting you to that vision of the beloved community? I hope so. But if not, let's keep trying together to find it, because it is there. May it be so. Amen.